Seth Godin. Identity fuels action, and action creates habit. And habits are part of a practice, and a practice is the single best way to get where you want to go. Seth Godin.
Welcome, everybody. This is Jessica and Darren Salquist with Next Level.
Good vibes only.
That's right. So let's break down that quote by Seth Godin.
Identity fuels action.
Identity fuels action.
So what does that this little piece and tidbit do for you?
Yeah. So who I am, who I want to become, who I identify with, then creates that action. It fuels the action. I like that because I get to choose who I want to show up as each day, and that's going to fuel my action.
Yeah. Well, not even in the day, right? In that moment.
In the moment,
Yeah.
moment by moment. That's how we do our heroic app swiping, right? How we look at our compass and we're looking at our identity, our virtues, and our behavior.
Yeah. Going into the identity, knowing how do we want to show up into that moment, and again, around energy, work, and love. If any of you out there are using that heroic app, then you are familiar with those three targets. Again, identity, behavior, and those virtues.
Yeah.
And those virtues are those targeted behaviors. And those targeted behaviors, again, it's going to create that identity, that repeated beingness. That's something that we've talked about before. That identity literally means that repeated beingness, right? If we were to ask you to give me 2 or 3 of your friends, and then I was going to ask those friends to identify you, to say, hey, how is this person? What would you say about this person? They're going to share some things about you based off how they see you, based on how you show up in those interactions that you have with them. So therefore, there's your identity, that repeated beingness.
Yeah. And going back to that quote, you started off with that identity is fueling that action, but I like the next piece of it too. It talks about then that action creates that habit or behavior. We just did a workshop on habits and creating your identity. And so this is a nice timeline if you say identity fuels action and then create an arrow, and then the action creates a habit, an arrow, and then habits are part of practice. And that's where we create the road to mastery is in that practice section, right? We have our theory, we have our practice, and we sit there for a long time and we continue to practice until we actually create that habit or behavior. And that's where, as Seth says, where you want to go.
Yeah. And again, I like the piece of writing it down, right? Starting your morning off with intention, starting your morning off with how do you want to show up wherever it is that you're going in the morning. Maybe it's to the gym, maybe it's to work, but not just showing up. And I think that sometimes happens quite a bit, more than we probably, if we really think about it, that's maybe more than likely what the majority of us are doing. I don't know how often anybody's really thinking about how do I want to show up today, or what identity do I want to go into this meeting with? What identity am I going to show up to this workout in? What identity am I going to go meet these individuals, or maybe the sales pitch that I'm doing, or whatever it could be in your life? How is it that you're showing up to this, right? You're putting practice to it. Maybe you have a few things that you're going to say, but at the same time thinking about who is that person that's kind of helped get you to where you are today, and what maybe would that person do? What identity is that? And could you lead with part of that identity, that individual that inspires you to be better, that individual that inspires you to be that best version of you, and for you to show up as your best? And showing up as your best, again, is showing up as that identity, right? And they've talked about this a little bit with little children and acting as superheroes, and who's your superhero? And a little kid would say, this kid said, Batman. And they had him go through these ring of keys to say, okay, you got to find the key that unlocks this door. And the kid is going through all these different keys. Let's say there's 30 plus keys on there, and he's trying key after key after key. And intentionally, the individuals that set up this test didn't put the key in there that actually works. They wanted to see what would happen with these individuals. And this child that they talked to says, are you going to give up? You're not finding the key, and the kid says, Batman never gives up. And he kept going. That was his identity, right? And so we get to see that. Watch in life, can we bring that up ourselves?
Yeah.
Again, what is that identity that we're going to show up with to not give up, to keep moving in the direction that we want to go when we get knocked down?
That's right. Well, I think the word that you use that's resonating with me is that intention. What are you waking up every day and reminding yourself of your identity? There's good and bad of autopilot, right? You can have bad habits on autopilot, and you can have effective habits on autopilot or ineffective habits on autopilot. And you want to create the autopilot, obviously, for the effective habits. But what you're stating there is that little boy is saying, hey, I'm Batman. I don't give up, right? And so we have created a connection and a visualization to an identity that we are feeling strongly and connected to. So having that intention every day that we are waking up saying, I am, or I have, or something that is impactful to yourself, that you're identifying that is who you are in that moment, and that each action, each habit you're going to take is going to solidify that is you, that is your beingness, that is your repeated beingness, because it's not, the definition of identity isn't how you are sometimes, right?
Yeah.
It's not how you are when everybody's looking, right? It's not how you are even when no one's looking. It's that repeated beingness of what you do on a daily basis, moment by moment, second by second, and what you're doing. And so one thing that I was going to point out is our conversation we had on our drive home. We had a nice little getaway to the coast, Oregon coast. And on the way home, we were talking about kind of that repeated beingness, that intention of going even on a vacation, whether it's a few days, a week, a few weeks. But what's your identity when you go on vacation? It's not, if you so choose. I mean, if you choose this identity, that's your choice. But for us, the identity when we go on vacation is not, I am not a healthy eater. I can do whatever I want. I'm going to binge on sugar. Like when we think about that and we talk about that, like we talked about how we left the vacation and we didn't come with intentions of our vacation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important conversation to have, and something just to realize, like, what is important to you? Repeated beingness. It's not, you don't take 100% like vacation time off of your goals when you're on vacation, but how do you have a good time, find that balance, and continue to maintain your repeated beingness, your identity, while you are doing a different a protocol, or doing something different than your day job, or you're on a vacation in a sunny climate. What is the difference? Why do we decide that we're going to let our identity completely vanish when we go on a vacation, or we go to a celebration, or we go to a wedding? I mean, that's an interesting thought. Like, I think that's a good reflection too of thinking to yourself, like, what is my identity, and why would it change when I'm going to go do something that maybe you're giving yourself permission to, or maybe society just states it's the design flaw, right? Well, when you go do this, you can go do this, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us get into that habit, and where we go to places that we kind of forget some of our protocols and some of the things that we're doing. When we go on vacation, we sometimes go on vacation from ourselves to what actually gets us there. Then after the vacation, sometimes maybe we don't feel our best, or maybe we come back from vacation, a few pounds heavier than when we left, because we let ourselves, in what we would say, enjoy ourselves. If that's the case, then are we not enjoying life more than we're not, right? That what is enjoyment? And a lot of times we look at food as being that enjoyment, and that has been the culture. That's what has been created, when sometimes that's very challenging to look at as taking that identity of food as being fuel. And that's where even myself on this vacation, this vacation down in Cannon Beach, that I allowed myself to have a few treats, and probably a little bit more than I normally would have. And I had to start thinking, because I'm making a goal for 2025 to be a healthy eater. That identity that I'm gonna be a healthy eater. And knowing some of these foods that I was eating, I was like, I would not be eating this right now. I would not have this apple turnover. I would not be
Eating this
having
bear
this
claw.
chocolate decadence or this oatmeal chocolate chip cookie, you know. Then that's what I was thinking. So I was going through that process. And then I started thinking, I had a couple beers. I was like, oh, am I going to, I really enjoy beer. Is that something I'm going to give up? And I have to really question myself in that area. Is like, well, again, depends on what I want. What are my goals? And how am I going to hold myself to those things? Am I going to give myself a little bit of leeway now and then? Or am I going to go in that direction? And I'll answer that question when I get there. It's going to be in the moment, right? But having that, saying that right now is that what I would do next time going on vacation, and this is what we kind of talked about, is setting our intentions while we're there. Are we going to go and eat foods and not pay attention to some of our protocols? Or are we going to go there and say, okay, we're going to have one meal that maybe we don't typically would eat, but that would be it for that day, right? Not multiple meals. Or depending on how long you're there, like when we were in Europe, I definitely went a little overboard.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the part that we always talk about. And we were sharing these things because this is a lifelong journey. There's no aha moment that you're like, I got it. This is exactly, I'm there. I'm exactly where I need to be. I'm going to be perfect in making these decisions for the rest of my life, whether it's movement, whether it's food, whether it's how you respond. There's always going to be a moment where you're going to stop and think. And for people to be successful, that takes intention and action plans and planning things out. And I think when people think of like a vacation, they're like free for all, right? I don't need to plan anything. I'm just going to go. I'm going to relax. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to do whatever I want. But then again, reflecting back on the process of it, who do I want to become? Who am I? How do I want to show up every day? I mean, there's definitely outcomes and consequences of just letting loose versus, hey, I'm going to rein in my design flaw that I think it's just a free for all. And you start to have intention. So we talked about creating some bright lines, and even a bright line doesn't need to be 100% one way or the other. A bright line still can be, and just mind you that I'm saying that a bright line to me can be, I'm going to have, a dessert after my dinner one time while we're gone for 3 days. That's to me a bright line. I have to create not an ingredient, but basically a commitment to self that, okay, I'm going to have dessert one of the nights that we're there, so then I get to pick and choose because it's going to be special. I'm not just going to have random dessert every night, but I get to say, oh, this one looks really amazing. It's fresh. It was homemade. It was this, it was that. And I'm choosing this dessert tonight. So that's what I mean by creating a bright line is I'm having one, or a bright line is I'm going to wake up every morning and go out on the beach and go for a minimum of a mile walk. That's creating an action, a commitment to self, right? You're creating a bright line that, or an algorithm, you're creating an algorithm. When I wake up, I'll put on my shoes, I'll go on a walk, no matter what that looks like. So you're creating those intentions of going on a trip. And even better, like you said, before you even go on the trip, how do you want to show up on your trip?
Yeah. I mean,
again,
that's putting a lot of work into it. And I think that's what it takes. Life is work, right? And that's what we're talking about as well, is when you go on a vacation, you make plans. But what you don't plan is sometimes your nutrition. And again, if for me, going into this new world of becoming or being a healthy eater, identifying as somebody that is a healthy eater, those are big choices that I really had to think about this week. And as I allowed myself to have these treats, it's like, oh, okay, I got to start thinking what I'm going to do next year, as this won't be part of my eating habits. And so it's having those intentional intentions and what you're saying, those bright lines. What are my standards? What am I going to hold myself to? And this is the thing to where in order to do this and to create these habits that we're looking at with this based around identity, the first step is in knowing who do you want to become? Who do you want to be? Right? There's nothing set in stone where no matter how you see yourself right now, if you took a moment and No matter when you thought about this, you stopped and you looked at yourself in the mirror and you really kind of looked at yourself like, who am I? And if there's something, and then we're many different people, right? We're just not one person. There's many different sides of us. And we can look at the things that definitely we love and that we enjoy. Like, man, I love that person. That person's motivated. That person gets things done. But there's this other person that kind of enjoys their treats and goes through these other things to where it's like, okay, if I want to change that, that's not set in stone, right? I'm not somebody that just goes and enjoys pastries all the time. That's part of my identity right now. But if I want to change that, I have that ability to create that change based off my habits. And that's what we're talking about here is the identity piece of it. Mm-hmm. And this is what we'll talk about here in a moment is when we talk about habits, that there's that outcome-based habits, and then there's the identity-based habits. And I think, Jess, you're going to kind of go into that and right now about what that is. So let's kind of break that down a little bit. And again, this is coming from James Clear, these outcome-based habits and these identity-based habits. And see if you guys are setting up any goals for yourself to think about this when you set up your next goal, coming from identity versus the outcome.
Mm-hmm. And identity, I will say, it is scary. I think what Darren said, it's not just one identity of who you are, right? You can identify with virtues, you can identify with who you want to become, and it's daunting for people. I mean, we've been working with people through coaching and talking about identity, and that stumps a lot of people.
Yeah.
People are unclear of what they want in life, who they want to become, or even who they currently are. And that's okay. You don't need to have it all figured out in one moment. As you can see through Darren and I's conversation is we continue to figure out life in this lovely journey that we're on a daily basis.
Yeah, constantly changing identities.
And it's processing, it's self-reflection, it's figuring out what's important to you. And like what Darren said, tomorrow may not be what is most important to you today. So it's okay to morph and change and you bring your identity to that next level as you grow, because the goal is that, as Darren was saying, is that you are driven by your identity-based habits, which is more of an intrinsic, internal drive. So I would say who I want to become, who I currently am, and that's really important to me. And then I create the process of how I'm going to actually do it. So I focus on the who before I focus on the how or the why or the when or all those other questions that you can ask yourself. And then from that, the conclusion, the outcome of that is that I have the outcome that I desire. And that outcome can change based off the process. So we talk about agency, we talk about pathways, and we talk about targets, right? So your agency is your drive to actually do it. Your pathways are an infinite amount of pathways, which is the process, right? And then you have your target, which is the outcome. And as you're developing who you are and you work through those processes and those pathways and those obstacles and those barriers and all these things that you're going through, then you create this target, this goal, this outcome, which can change. And that's where I think people get really nervous is that they're like, well, I said my identity is this. This was my process, which you want to plan, right? Plan as much as possible. And this was supposed to be the outcome, and it's not. But within all of that, there is ability to be flexible and the ability to trust in yourself and the ability to have confidence, to really know that this is not what I want any longer, or this is really what I want. It takes a lot of practice to really know what you really want to work on. And that's why we put on our workshops. That's why we do coaching, is because your first time trying out who you are and your identity and the outcomes you want to see, it may not be where you're going to be 2 months from now, 3 months from now. And you have to allow yourself the flexibility to adjust. So we're working on identity, internal, creating the process, and then having an outcome. Obviously your goal is your outcome, but it will ebb, it will flow, it will weigh, it will sway based off of the process that you put into it.
Yeah. And that's what the big picture is here. There's two ways to look at this on how you set those goals up, right? As what you just described was that identity base. Number one, what's the identity that you're looking to create? And that identity, me wanting to be a healthy eater, or the identity of someone that eats healthy, which then is going to start working on that process to, what does a healthy eater eat? What does that look like? So there's my process, with the goal and my outcome being what? So number one, the reason I'm going towards this direction is to kind of see what I'm capable of, to kind of see how I'm going to feel by eliminating certain foods, seeing what my body can possibly do, what kind of changes my body might go through, because we know what changes our bodies go through when we eat foods that aren't healthy. And those are different things. So this is where identity-based is laying out that identity first and then creating that process to the outcome, or coming to the outcome. Sometimes if we go outcome first, thinking, I want to lose weight, so that's the outcome I'm working on. Well, what's my process? Well, I got to control some of the foods that I'm eating. And then looking at what identity is that going to create. And this is where I can kind of look at when I was eating this weekend, knowing that I'm ordering certain foods, like this doesn't fit my identity, right? Mm-hmm. Like this doesn't go, and then looking at, is this going to get me to the outcome that I want? And the outcome right now for me is not about weight. What my outcome is, my goal is to see what I'm capable of by eliminating or eating healthy foods only. And this is where I'd kind of go down this line of, there's healthy foods and there's not healthy foods. There's really nothing in between. And what my bright line is that I'm laying down, or what I'm looking at right now as I'm going through this process, is 4 ingredients or less. And the foods that I'm going to partake in or ingest or whatever is just going to those 4 ingredients. And so what I want to really focus on is the identity, which then can create that process. What a healthy, somebody that eats healthy, what would they eat?
Yeah.
What would be in their on their menu, I guess, of foods, right?
What's on my menu?
Maybe. And then those things, habits can, again, by going through this process with these, what Jessica was just talking about, the habits, is that habits can help you achieve all of those things. And it's not necessarily about having something. That identity habit is about becoming someone. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, what really the big picture of this is becoming someone, becoming that person that you want to be, becoming that person that you can look in the mirror and say, man, no matter where you're at, always sharing that I love you. And this is a tough journey. We're going through this, but who do I want to become, and what's that identity, and how do I get to that process?
Yeah.
So who can I become?
That's right. And that is a good, question, mantra. Write it down. I mean, we talked about creating some cards that, when you go out to do a celebration or vacation, that you create these cards that you can bring with you and have your intention written out. Like, stick it on the old school way. When I grew up, I stuck everything on the window or the mirror in the bathroom. You're going to be there every morning, brushing your teeth, washing your face, getting ready. And it's a great place to remind yourself, what is your intention for the day? Most of us start in the bathroom. Yeah. So some of the questions, though, based off of a reflection for yourself, and you can rewind this, play it back. But when we're talking about these identity-based habits, just remember to start super small, even with identity. I mean, you don't have to bite off something super huge. And if you bite something small, medium, large off of your identity, then make sure you absolutely create your processes super small. It doesn't, the momentum that you will create, we've talked about it before, will add up to accumulate and compound over months, way more than if you just barely work on it once in a blue moon. So a small, super small habit or behavior is going to benefit you, and you get to celebrate that win every day. So if I wrote down an intention for the day that, I'm motivated to move. I'm a person that moves on a daily basis, right? Every time I got up and I moved, every time I decided what that process is going to be, it might just be, first thing is getting my shoes on and walking out the door, right? That's the intention of it, right? You're creating these actual pathways in your brain, these myelin sheaths that continue to get practice after you do it over and over and over again. They create these connections. I watched this beautiful thing of how people can create new thoughts and patterns in their brain, and how these synapses actually reach out to each other and stimulate each other, and they connect. And it's like promising, right? It's promising that I can create a different process and behavior. Yeah, once you're pickled, but it doesn't mean you can't create another behavior that is complements or takes away from that own behavior. But when we were talking in our workshop, we talked about some questions to ask yourself. So pause, rewind, whatever you need to do when you have a moment to journal about this. And some of the questions we asked were, what identities have you actually adopted that might be holding you back? What are the things that you believe that you are, that you believe your identity is, that is actually holding you back? Because what you think you can do or what you don't think you can do, you're absolutely right. And that's part of that self-talk. So we talk about, how has self-talk impacted you? Are you being impeccable with your thoughts and your words that you're talking about yourself? Are you able to, add that to your intention? Is how are you going to say something positive and supportive for you to meet that goal that you want, that identity that you want? And how can you reframe that self-talk to be more empowering and positive? So take that negative thing that you may have said to yourself, that ineffective way that you're talking about yourself, and flip it. What would be the opposite of that? What can you do to actually support and to champion yourself so that you can celebrate those things that maybe you've been holding yourself back, and those habits that you want to create? And then, are you focused on the identity-based habit or an outcome-based? And that's a good reflection, because if you're really focused on outcome-based, then really, figuring out, is this really important to me, or am I just looking for an outcome? It's easier to decide who you want to become, your process, which creates the outcome. And then, what is your identity right now? Whatever that might be, it might be multiple things, but what is your identity right now, and who do you truly want to become? And then documenting and journaling about, where do you see that gap? And sometimes when you journal about the gap itself of who you want to become and who you currently are, it can help you decide some of those processes. You decide the identity you want to become, and the gap can help you decide the processes, whether you want to add or delete something, because you want to install or delete something in your life to make it more meaningful and impactful, to get you to that, to believe in that actual identity of who you are becoming.
Yeah. And I like what you're talking about there, is writing it down, because the writing it down is the impactful part, right? We can sit there and have these thoughts, but as soon as you go on to something else, those thoughts are gone. And then you're on to doing the next thing. But if you take the time to really, really, number one, if you want to create change, what is that identity? And then having a strong why. Why is it that you want to create this change? What's the benefit? How's it going to benefit you? How's it going to benefit those maybe those around you? And once you can identify that and know your why and have a strong why to that, I think that's going to help you stay a little bit more dedicated to it, more devoted to it, more disciplined towards it. Because now it's not just important to you, but there's benefits to other individuals that are around you, that because you're going to become a better person for making these changes, then those around you are going to become better as well by that impact. And so this is kind of where, even going into when Jessica was talking about the self-talk, 100%. I mean, and again, I would say probably a high majority of us do this, right? We beat ourselves up. We say things to ourselves that just we might not say to other people, or we wouldn't want people to say to us, right? It's hard we wouldn't want to hear that, but yet we are saying that to ourselves, and then our brain is processing that. And again, our brain doesn't know you're joking or you're being serious or it's not real. It's taking what you're saying and deciding to do something with it, right? It's processing it, putting it somewhere. And so if you do something that you might say something negative about yourself, try flipping the switch. And again, we talked about this tool of flipping the switch is creating that pause, and then saying, you know what, that's not like me. I'm not somebody that does that. Like, let me create the change. What do I need to do different next time? And this is where writing it down. This is where, again, you get to reflect on your day. This is the after actions report on your day. How did you show up today? Did I do what I said I was going to do? Where did I show up? What went really well? When I work with clients, this is what I have them do every week. This is what my coach does, which I haven't been very good at it now that I say that out loud, is what went well, what went better, what needs work. And then being able to break that down. And by doing this is doing it every day, not doing it weekly. So that way you have something that you get to reflect on and see how you're going and making progress with it. And again, creating that identity. And again, when you recognize, like, I'm doing a lot of these things that are actually supporting my identity, awesome. You're going to feel good about it. And this is what it's all about. It's about feeling good about yourself. It's not about beating yourself up. If we don't hit the ball out of the park, it's okay. If we strike out that day, it's okay. Remember, the baseball player misses the ball 7 out of 10 times and get into the Hall of Fame, right? They connect 3 out of 10 times, and that gets them a good base of getting them to the Hall of Fame. So we're going to miss out, and we're going to go through that. And the other thing I would just say, again, when going into my identity about food, it's not about what I need to start eating, because I'm eating healthy foods, right? It's about what I need to stop eating. And those are things I just want to put out there for you guys whenever you guys are making change. Maybe it's not about what you need to start doing. It's really about what do we need to stop doing that is not supporting the identity that we want to create for ourselves.
Yeah. It's laying and doing the hard work, the groundwork, how are you going to figure out who you want to become, who you even are, if you're not doing the work of reflection, really understanding what's important to you. And that's why I like those questions that you said, what am I doing well, better, or what needs work, is by doing that on a daily basis, you're going to get to know yourself a little better.
Yeah.
And the goal, like Darren said, is like you having confidence in the decisions you make, in who you are, how you show up every day. People will notice the behavior change. We talked about the model of behavior change with the identity process outcome. People will notice. They will ask you. They will say, what are you doing differently? Because they're seeing such a change in you. And that's because you're trying to understand yourself more. This is self, reflection and being able to process who you are in changes in life. Sometimes we get really confused because we're like, wow, I'm changing. I'm growing. Is my identity something different than it was a year ago, 2 years ago? And I would say yes, absolutely. That's called growth, right? You're going to change, you're going to evolve and be okay with it. But know that every step of the way, if you so choose to accept the challenge of personal growth and personal development, you're going to have your plateaus, which embrace them, appreciate them, and you're going to have your highs and your lows, and you're going to have your peaks on the mountaintops, and you're going to go right back down to that valley because you're going to climb another peak, and that is your choice. That is your choice if you want to do that, which takes work and reflection and understanding who the heck am I? Because there are days when I wake up and I go, what the hell am I doing? What am I doing? And to ground me, it is journaling. It is reflecting on myself. It is knowing what's important to me. It is reminding me of who I am and how I want to show up each day and how the heck am I going to get there?
Yeah. Coming back to the fundamentals. And again, like Jessica talked about those plateaus, we're going to be living in the more plateaus majority of our life than we are having really high highs and really low lows. That's where we typically live, is on those plateaus. But recognize when we are shooting for new targets and creating change, and that's what we're going to get for. And when we get there, that's where that plateau is, right? We're not going to get there all of a sudden all the world's problems have been solved. It's a point in your life, and then you get to keep going, right? So that you get to continue to do the work. That's the awesome thing about life, that we get to do the work every single day. And then what Jessica said, sometimes we wake up, it's like, what is going on today? Where am I at? And it's just coming back down to your fundamentals. And sometimes we'll get lost for 2 or 3 or 4, maybe a couple weeks. Maybe you might get lost for a month. But it's about, again, speed is a force, right? How fast can we get back? When we get knocked off balance, how fast can we regain that balance? And we regain that balance by coming back to our fundamentals. Again, checking into your identity. Are you being the person that you want to be? And knowing that you get to create change. Wherever you're at right now is not set in stone. You get to create that change. And by doing that is building those new habits, knowing your why, and just keep yourself moving and embrace the challenge. That's what life's all about. Enjoy the challenge.
You're going to sit in the process longer than you're going to sit anywhere else. And if you can't enjoy it,
Yeah.
it's got a long road.
And just repeat
Long
those
road.
behaviors. Keep repeating those behaviors of that identity, and that's what it's all about. That, again, what we talked about, repeated beingness, which is that identity. And again, if you're not showing up, that's your identity as well. I mean, it works both ways.
Yeah.
So
our next workshop is going to be on motivation.
that's right. October 25th at Core Fit.
That's right. So our next podcast will also be on some BMAP, which we'll talk about, and motivation and moving forward.
Yeah. All right, you guys. Thanks for joining us today, and take your life to the next level with
Good vibes only.
Peace.